I wanted to go back and look at, we were studying this week in Acharei Mot, and I've been thinking through the wicked lamp, because as we're going through Workbook Two, again, we have to keep in mind that it's the wicked lamp, the proud look, the lying tongue, the hands that shed innocent blood, the heart that devises wicked plans, feet that run quickly to evil, false witness, breathing out lies, and one who separates brothers. Those are the things that are being judged in Revelation. So when we're talking about seals, trumpets, bowls, or whatever, we're really saying that the spirit of Adonai is going through the earth, and he is judging everything that is not of life. We're being judged according to a book of life, which is the Torah. It tells you what life is, it defines it, and it defines the behaviors of life. And when you're walking in that life, then you have no fear of this judgment that's coming, because you want these things out of the world. I mean, don't tell me you want pride to stay here. Because if you say, I don't want the tribulation, you're saying, please let the wicked lamp continue functioning and the world continue on its crazy course until we just destroy the entire earth. None of us wants another Tower of Babel. And sometimes you have to let the earth get to that point where, my goodness, there's nothing that they can't do if they put their minds to it. And so the tribulation is actually good news for people of faith, for people who want to walk in righteousness. But if we look at that counterpart to the holy menorah, and we look at the first branch on the wicked lamp, it's a proud look. And we say it's a high look. Okay? And if someone's look is too high, what are they trying to do? They're trying to place themselves above other people. And that's why reading in Acharei Mot this week, I thought it was so salient to what we're studying with the wicked lamp, because sometimes we're the last people to know that we're operating in the wicked lamp. If you notice that in your life, we're the last people to know our own problems and our own weak points. And if people weren't afraid to tell us the truth, we would get clued in a lot faster. But because we're so protective, basically proud of these high things, I call it high tower thinking. What it is you've got things in your life, or have had things in your life, that you knew were uncomfortable, hurtful, and wrong. And they needed to be dealt with. The Holy Spirit needed to deal with them. And people who have loved you over the years have tried to approach you about that thing. And what you did with that thing, rather than deal with it because you knew it would be painful, you put it up in a high tower. And you made it inaccessible to people. There are people who know that certain topics are off limits with you. Why are they off limits with you? Because they're up in your tower. That's why I call it high tower thinking. And over the years, it can get to a point where if you even ask them, what is that thing up there in my high tower? What's the subject you absolutely will not bring up with me? What's my that place where I'm saying, don't touch me there, it hurts too much. If you leave it up there long enough, and you become defensive enough, and you protect that tower long enough, people won't even tell you when you ask. Why? Because you have become so defensive about it. It's not worth, the relationship that you have with them for them to even try to bring it up, because they know how viciously you can protect. And it doesn't have to be in anger. It can be in depression. See, it doesn't have to be a high heat reaction to someone getting in that sensitive place. Sometimes you'll turn it to icicle and you'll freeze them away. You might burn them off, you might freeze them off. You might go into a depression where they say, well, it's not worth sending them into that to bring the topic up. And so actually, it might be something very hurtful to you, but you have placed it in a high spot. So you've got a high look, you've got a proud look as it concerns that topic, that thing, that subject in your life. And the problem with that is it's not a humble spirit if we're still protecting that thing. And sometimes that thing doesn't come out of the tower, even when you're trying to bring it down. It won't come out overnight, especially if you spent years defending and protecting that thing. And first you have to recognize it's up there, acknowledge how painful it's going to be. To what? Humble it. Pull it down to the right place in your life. And that's really the only way I know of identifying what those things are, is if you don't know what topics are off limits to you, where you feel like people are getting too close and it's too sensitive there. Okay, you already probably know what your high tower is, but you may not even know. And if you have people close enough to you, you can ask them and say, where am I especially sensitive? Where do you know that you're over the line with me on? Is there a certain subject, topic, problem in my life that you won't even try to bring up with me anymore because it's not worth the consequences? But don't ask it if you're going to use it against them. That's one reason they won't tell you. Again, they're afraid of the results. So even things that hurt us, that we carry inside of us, can be a source of pride. And we shouldn't really focus too much on the pride of the world being brought down and the tribulation, and that somehow our high towers will go untouched. See, he starts with his own home. He starts in his own house. And if he sees that his children have high places in their hearts and in their minds, then he wants to deal with that too. He wants to actually deal with it first. And no matter whether we're Jew or not Jew, we all identify as children of Abraham, right? Abraham is our father. And the sages listed 3 characteristics of a disciple of Abraham. And even Yeshua talked about if you are the children of Abraham, do this, right? And so those 3 things, and they're translated into English, those 3 things are a humble spirit. Let me back up. A good eye. Okay, we've already talked about the good eye versus the evil eye, right? And Yeshua taught us how to avoid the evil eye, basically. So it's a good eye. It's not just someone who is not stingy. All right? Having a good eye doesn't just mean that you're generous or not stingy. Having a good eye also has to do with not allowing yourself to fall into a mental competition with people. And I know exactly what I'm talking about because I struggle with that more when I was young than now, because now I think I just kind of got to zero. I don't care what other people are doing. All I care about is that I'm doing what I should be doing, and the rest of it's some divine machine, and they'll answer to the Father. I'm not their judge. But I want to move that needle even more. I want to move it from 0, where it's none of my business what other people are doing. I want to move that thing where it's truly a good eye. It's not just neutral. I want a good one. I don't want an evil one for sure. I would grade myself right now as more neutral. than anything else. But what I want is good. It says disciples of Abraham have a good eye. What does that mean? It means I take joy and pleasure in other people's successes. Now that's really easy for me to do with friends and family. People that are close to me and people who do nice things for me. But there's a problem with having a good eye only toward the people that you have a good relationship with. Even Yeshua teaches on this. Because the problem with that is those are the people who can pay you back. I'm going to look at Luke 14. Please let there be a Luke. Yes, there is a Luke. Luke 14:7. Through 14. Okay. Luke 14:7 through 14. And I'm assuming my version has got the same verses as you. As Yeshua teaching, it says he spoke a parable to those who were invited there because he saw them choosing places among the front seats. He said, when you are invited of a man to a banquet house, do not go and sit in the front seat. It might be that a more honorable man than you is invited there. And then he who has invited you and then he who has invited you and him will come and say to you, give the place to him. And you will be embarrassed when you get up and take a lower seat. But when you are invited, go and sit at the lower end, so that when he who has invited you comes, he will say to you, my friend, go up, sit higher, and you will have glory before all who sit with you. For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. He also said to him who had invited him, when you give a dinner or a supper, do not invite your friends, nor your brothers, nor your relatives, nor your rich neighbors, lest they invite you and you will be repaid for this. But when you give a reception, invite the poor, the maimed, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed, for they have nothing to repay you. For you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. All right, that's profound, guys. We've been talking about resurrection all this time. How do we prepare for the resurrection? Yeshua says if you want to be truly prepared for the resurrection, do good deeds for people who can't pay you back. You're thinking, well, who is that? There's any number of ways you can give to people who can't pay you back, or maybe they can't because they don't even know who you are. But when you give only to people who can do nice things back to you, you're not truly preparing for the resurrection. That's what Yeshua is saying. And he starts the teaching talking about when you go into a banquet, take the lower place. Don't take the high place, because he says it's going to be really embarrassing when the master of the banquet comes and moves you lower. So what are we talking about? Pride. Pride is something that goes up and down, up and down. If you remember reading Proverbs, how many times does it talk about pride as being something that is high that will be brought low? But there's also those who are low who will be lifted up. And that's what made me really look at some of these words that describe a disciple of Abraham. Because what we're studying, if there's any wicked lamp shining in our life, and remember what Yeshua said, make sure that your light is not darkness. make sure that the humility of wisdom that we should have does not every now and then kind of start smoking into a high look. And it's rampant, guys. You don't have to be around Hebraic roots, Messianic type people very long in the real world to realize that there's a lot of high things going on. There's a lot of competitive arguments going on, and they are not for the sake of heaven. That's not what they're for. They are to be proven right. And if that's the sole point of the argument, to demonstrate my rightness, then it's self-serving and it's pride, and it will have to be brought low. It will be brought low, as we're reading about in the book of Revelation. So it says the 3 traits for a disciple of Abraham: it's a good eye, and that's going to be ayin tova. And if you'll remember the description of this area inside the Garden of Eden, way back in Bereshit, it said between these rivers there was good gold, right? Tov, it's tov. So we want an I, feminine, so it becomes tova, right? So we want a clear eye. We want a pure eye. We want a good eye. And what do we know about this place of good gold that was located within the rivers of Eden? It says that the rivers of Eden gave drink. All right. So when we look at Yeshua, and we know that he identifies himself as the rivers, to those who are thirsty, come to me and drink. Right? Yeshua is the rivers of Eden. He gives drink. And so if we are going to drink from Yeshua, then it's going to humble us. It's going to make us not just good gold, but it's going to help us develop this good eye. Instead of a proud look or a high eye, it'll give us a good eye, where we can look at other people and be proud of their success, not ours. Now, it's not to say that you won't get a good feeling. If you have some success, you will. That's normal. That's human. But when we're disconnected from people, and like I was thinking about, sometimes you know things about people and you're thinking, well, their character is really not the best. How are they being blessed with all that stuff? All right? See, right there, I even moved off of 0 to negative. Right there, I had a bad eye. Why? I was begrudging them. See, even if I accept 0 as the divine machine running everything, I should look at that person and say, yeah, God's in charge. Whatever good or bad is happening to them, it's all under his control. But to be able to say, hey, I know this person's a bit of a rascal, but something good just happened to the body of Messiah because of this person, and I'm glad. I'm glad. That's where we want to move. We want to have a good eye. The things that we might know about them, they're still bad things. But if there's something good happening to the body of Messiah, then we should be able to have joy along with them and not begrudge them those successes. So a good eye, it says a humble spirit. And the translation I have here, which I looked up the word, which the root of it was shafel. And again, it means to be brought low. But the translation I have here says an undemanding soul. Now, an undemanding soul doesn't work. At the natural level, a soul is wired to demand. That's all it does. It's appetite, emotion, desire, and intellect. So the soul, the nefesh, it is definitely apart from the Ruach. Remember, it says you have to have a humble spirit, a humble Ruach. And then it says an undemanding soul. Well, how can I have an undemanding soul when its very essence is demands? It says, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I want, I think. It's the nefesh that says, I think, therefore I am. So how do I develop an undemanding soul? How do I pull that soul down to the proper level? And when I first read the Hebrew words for these things, like humble and undemanding, at first it just looked like something that's low. But then I started assembling context. Remember the rule of complete mention? Or the rule of progressive mention? The more you start looking at the context of these words, the more you realize what's happening is an adjustment. Or as we would say, an attitude adjustment. Basically, it's describing people who are on a level too high in their own eyes. And what's happening? He's bringing them down to a proper level. He's making an adjustment, right? And that's exactly what Yeshua is teaching in Luke 14. He's talking about a self-assessment adjustment. So if we're going to be children of Abraham with a good eye, a humble spirit, and an undemanding soul, then we have to get better at self-assessment. Not demand so much of other people. Be humble in spirit and be glad when other people succeed instead of seeing it as a competition. Well, I could have done that. Well, I'm just as good as they are. I have more experience than them. I have more education than them. I've been studying Torah longer than them. Well, see, that's a bad eye. And if I have a bad eye, I can't have a humble spirit or an undemanding soul. Because at every success I see them have, this soul is going to be demanding and saying, why aren't you getting that privilege? Why aren't you getting that honor? And then we realize what Yeshua is saying. Don't think you deserve more than what you're getting. And how did he word it? Maybe it was Rabbi Krieger that worded it. It's, you need to believe you have everything already. I think that's the way it went. I see Kim nodding. Thanks. She remembers. You need to believe, if you want to develop a good eye, which is preparation for the resurrection. That's the key in that passage in Luke. Yeshua was saying, prepare for the resurrection. So you need to prepare with a good eye. And in order to develop that good eye toward other people and the humble spirit and the undemanding soul, then right now, at this very moment, you have to believe that you already have everything you need. That he has given you exactly, the Father has given you exactly what you need for this moment in your life. And you're good. And when you accept that, when you truly believe it, then it matters not what so-and-so has, or how so-and-so is being honored, or how big so-and-so, how big a following they have, or how many times they get invited to teach or speak or sing or do liturgy or whatever it might be in our lives. What are we doing? We're choosing, if we do believe we have everything, if we're a child and a disciple of Abraham, if we have everything, then it's much easier, I think, to start moving that needle in the direction of the good eye. Because what does it say? Say, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be empty. What does it mean? It means I already have everything. At the resurrection, I will have everything that I need. because Yeshua fills in any lack. In fact, there's an organization in Israel called Chesed Shel Emet. I'll type it. Well, it doesn't like Hebrew words. It still didn't like it. It should be Chesed. No, not meat, Emet. There it is. It makes up new words for me. But chesed, if you'll remember, was one of the traits of Abraham. And it's mercy. It's loving kindness. And if we're going to be disciples of Abraham, and over in the Gospels, Yeshua teaches from Abraham as a context as to what his disciples are supposed to be. And this organization in Israel, Chesed Shel Emet, it translates literally into true mercy. Emet is truth. Chesed is mercy. So Chesed Shel Emet, what is their job? How can they stamp that title on their organization? Well, here's what they do. When there's a terrorist bombing in Israel, they rush to the location with special equipment and they comb the entire area where the bomb went off, picking up the smallest fragments of bone and human flesh that you can imagine. I mean, talk about going over things with a fine-tooth comb. They will search until they are satisfied that they have found every fragment of a human body. And then they will submit it for DNA analysis to connect that tissue with the proper person. And when all those pieces of flesh, tissue, bone, whatever, when all those pieces are collected and identified as what is left of that person, they return it to the family for burial. How can the dead person ever pay them back? At least in this life. Maybe in the resurrection, like Yeshua said. But in this life, that is chesed shel emet. It's true mercy because you have no expectation. In fact, you're doing what you're doing because you don't want to be paid back. I don't want any reward on this earth for what I'm doing. That is true chesed. That is exactly what Yeshua is saying here. When you give a dinner or supper, don't invite your friends, your brothers, your relatives, your rich neighbors, lest they invite you, and you will be repaid. But when you give a reception, invite the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. For they will have nothing to repay you. For you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. And so that passage right there really helped me figure out, that was my concern. How do I move my needle from zero most of the time? It's not zero around people I know or like. Why? Well, like Yeshua said, how do they pay me back? They pay me back with friendship. They pay me back with companionship. But when someone can't pay you back with friendship, companionship, honoring you with good things, with, we'll just use Facebook since I pick on Facebook all the time. You know what? They can't heart you. They can't thumbs up you. They can't go, wow. They can't pay you back. How many of us would stay on Facebook if nobody ever responded? There wouldn't be a Facebook if nobody ever responded. That's why we're there. We're there for the human contact. And a lot of people are addicted to it. Why? Because they're not moving their needle in the right direction. They want the constant affirmation, but outside of their digital life, maybe they don't know how to practice chesed shel emet, which is simply doing things for no reward. Simply because Yeshua's heart beating in you knows that those families are going to grieve until they know that every possible piece of tissue from their loved one is buried. Remember, we've talked for weeks now about proper rituals of death, burial, and mourning. If you thought bits of your relative were still stuck to the restaurant window, would you rest easy? How would it affect your mourning? See, something like that can tend to have no end. You think of people lost at sea and or something has happened and they have nothing to bury or to mourn properly. Sometimes just having that tangible saying, this was my loved one, and I've got something to put in the grave and put a name on. It's worth a lot. But they can't pay you back. And that's the wonder that Yeshua is saying. That's the wonder of resurrection, is the things that you've done with his heart, where you just did them and wanted nothing back. You didn't want the recognition. You didn't want to be the keynote speaker, right? You didn't want to give the best readings at Shabbat service. What did you do? You did not concern yourself with other people. You simply concerned yourself with getting the job done. And that's where we want to go when we're talking about this wicked lamb, because it's an eye toward the resurrection. We're not just dealing with a wicked lamb. We're trying to prepare for a better resurrection. And ironically, better compared to what? Better than what you would have had before, not better than somebody else. That's what we're saying, right? We're trying to take competition and comparisons out of our spiritual walk. That's the goal. And the more we can take competition and comparisons out of our spiritual walk, the more I think we're going to be comforted when we start seeing these things occur that are, we call them midah keneged midah, which is measure against measure. You're starting to see retribution in the earth as the wicked lamb is judged. And that's what we see in Revelation, is that every single institution that mankind has placed his faith in, or let's say has misplaced his faith in, is going to be shaken or destroyed. Now, how do I know if I have misplaced my faith? Because when that focus of my faith, or that object of my faith, begins to be shaken in the last days, it will start to trouble me in my heart. And I will begin to be afraid. So just keep a log of a typical week. What do you place your faith in a typical week? Well, how do I know where my faith is? Just tell me where you spend your time. That's all you have to do, really. That's the simple one. If you want to know where your faith is, then just keep a record of where you're spending your time, because time really is a most precious commodity. You only get so much. In fact, the rabbis say it's measured by words. Every human being is allotted so many words in a lifetime, and when you use them all up, you die. So, why am I still talking, right? I don't know if that's true or just a fun midrash. But time is precious to us because we only have a limited amount of time. If we're wanting to do good for people who can't pay us back, if we're trusting in Yeshua, and that's his advice on how to spend our time, not trying to move ourselves up the ladder. And instead, Yeshua gives us the opposite advice. He says, move yourself down the ladder. If you're not sure where you actually should be, then go ahead and seat yourself at the kiddie table. Right? And let somebody else walk in and say, hey, what are you doing at the kiddie table? Move right up here. We got a great place for you. Redeeming our time is important, but if we're not redeeming it with faith in the right thing and in humility, we're just kind of running in place, but then we're chewing up time that we really don't have to waste. I didn't mean to make that rhyme. So what do? We analyze our time and say, okay, this week I read a book on chemtrails or the dark internet? What's it got? There's something dark out there. I keep seeing it. It's one of those phrases you start hearing people use and you have no idea what they're talking about. Dark web, that's it. I'm sure it's a conspiracy. It's going to kill us all, right? But there's an endless number. If you just want to turn your laptop on in the morning and type in latest conspiracy, I'm sure you'll get a fresh one every day. How much time do you spend on that? How much time do you spend listening to people debate politics or debating it yourself? If we watch the news 30 minutes a day, great. But if you leave it on all day, how many things will you find to worry about? You'll be worried about the military. You'll be worried about economics. You'll be worried about guns. You name it. They'll have a whole list of things every single day that you're supposed to worry about. And every story will convince you that we're all going to die if we don't fix this problem. And all of a sudden, we're more focused on what a news organization says our problems are than what the Word does. See, if we take our time and we say, all right, I'm going to watch the news 30 minutes a day. But if I'm going to watch the news 30 minutes a day, then I at least need to have 30 minutes in the Word. And that just brings me to 0. Right? What I believe in is where I will invest my time. And so a lot of times we're wasting time when if we read the Word, what the Word has to say about economics and military and global warming and gun control, it covers all that stuff. If I start reading what the Word says, then I have a comfort because now I'm watching the news. I'll take my 30 minutes a day. I'll watch the news. And what will I start to get upset? No. Because now I'm more like an impartial observer. Now I'm just discerning the times. But where is my comfort found? It's found in the Word. Because that's where my faith is. Because to allow especially a secular news organization, to determine what I should be worried about? See, that will make me into a demanding soul. I will start demanding this and demanding that. Why? Because I've got my eyes on what everybody else is doing instead of working on my job, which is immersing myself in the Word and making sure that every day I settle for nothing less than walking in the spirit of that Word, so that what I'm doing is applying the Holy Lamp, the 7 spirits of Adonai, as opposed to a proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood. And trust me, you can get all that. You can get all 7 abominations of the wicked lamp in about 30 seconds of a news broadcast. That's not even turning the channel to some of the bad stuff, right? So that's what we want to do, because we have to realize when we're looking at Revelation, the big number is 7. He doesn't play games with us. I know we think Revelation's real mysterious and everything, but a lot of that is brought on by our own selfishness. How can we be selfish? Because we want to know something that everybody else doesn't know. And admit it, that's why you read Revelation, because you want to understand all these mysterious things that nobody else gets. That's why you probably, when you went in the Christian bookstore 20 years ago, you probably brought more end-time prophecy stuff than you did Torah studies. Admit it, all right? Go into any of our libraries, and if those books are still out there, we'll know it's true. Right? That's pride. That's saying I want to know more than the next person. It's not saying I want to do good to people that can't pay me back. It's a different mindset. But here's the thing. In Revelation, he put a big number on there. And instead of focusing on the big number he planted in the book of Revelation, we focus on 1. 666. Why do we focus on 666 when everything else in the book of Revelation is 777? Well, there again, we tend to focus on exactly the wrong thing. If 10 people in a day compliment you, but one person tells you you're too ugly, too fat, too incompetent, or too whatever, which one do you remember? You remember the bad word, not the good word. But the number 7 is the good word of the book of Revelation. And the beautiful thing is found in the root of the Hebrew letter Zayin. Okay, most of you can at least count to 10 probably in Hebrew. And when you get to the 7th letter of the Hebrew Aleph Bet, that becomes like a shorthand. So instead of counting the regular way, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, instead, if we go back to texts like Psalm 119, what we see is a substitution of the Hebrew letters of the Aleph Bet in place of a number or a section. So if 7 is the big number of Revelation, we say, okay, what is the number 7 in Hebrew shorthand? Well, you know from Creation Gospel Workbook 1 that those patterns of the first 7 letters are embedded in the 7 days of creation, the 7 spirits of God, the 7 feasts, and even in the 7 churches of Revelation. So if we already have that pattern, let's go back to it. Let's say, what does Zayin, the Hebrew letter for 7, what does it mean? Well, the most popular definition that tends to float around Hebrew roots teaching is that it means a weapon. It means a sword or a dagger, kind of a short sword. But remember, we deal in contronyms. We know better than to say it's this way or that way the first time somebody asks us a question. Because if I'm asking the question, usually the answer is yes. Why? Just like when we were up at the headwaters of the Galilee at Passover, right here in front of us, we've got this pure, clean, beautiful, living water, the headwaters of the Galilee. And then just right over here, we have Banias, and we can stand there. We can look at what is called the gates of hell. We can look at the places cut into the rocks where they put their little pagan gods. And they're just next door to one another. That's what a contronym is. It's one word or one thing. And depending on your position to the word itself, it can either be obedience or it can be disobedience. It can be a blessing. It can be a curse. So we want to look at Zion the same way. Yes, it is kind of like a sword or a dagger, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. But on the other hand, if we look at the root of it, Zan, Zain Nun Sofit, what we have is something beautiful, and it means nourishment, right? And here's this understanding. When you die, and when you go in to the kingdom, it's understood that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that you'll be able to sit down at the table and to dine with them. Remember Yeshua saying that he was basically rebuking some people who thought they were going to have a place at the table. And he says, many are going to come from the east and the west, and they're going to sit down at the table, but you're going to be slung out. In other words, you're going to be uninvited. You think you're invited to this banquet, but you're not. And so as you go into that banquet, think even of Psalm 23 from last week, where it says, he prepares a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Well, now, at the time Psalm 23 was written, this is before Yeshua's resurrection. And so we know that the righteous and the wicked had an awareness of one another. And that's how the rich man could look across and see that Lazarus was comforted where he was. But there was no crossing over. It says there was a great gulf between the two of them. But yet, I can look over and see this person. How is that possible? Well, it's not physical. For one thing, it's not being perceived through a physical body. It's being perceived through the soul, through a consciousness. And so when the psalmist says, he prepares a table before me in the presence of my enemies, it's sorerai, sorerai. And you can hear sarah in that same word, which is tribulation. All right. So someone who troubles me, someone who is a point of my tribulation on this earth, once we die, I will be dining, if I am righteous, with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom. I will be one of those maybe who comes from the east, the west, the north, and the south. And those who had presumed to seat themselves in the better place will be moved down, as Yeshua said, or slung out entirely. And so for maybe I just thought I would barely make it in there and eat at the kiddie table, if I've conducted myself as a disciple of Abraham with a good eye, a humble spirit, an undemanding soul, then it may be that Yeshua walks by and says, what are you doing over here? Move on up. Why? Because he has provided every kind of nourishment. Zan. Zan. And then here's some examples. If you look in the book on page 35, I listed some Psalms for you. Psalm 113:2, Psalm 136:25, Psalm 145:16. There is a blessing after meals on Shabbat, on the seventh day. So if you're reading Revelation and you're thinking, what does this all mean? Then always Think of what you're reading in the context of things you already know about Shabbat. Now, there's things you don't already know about Shabbat. There's things we're still learning about Shabbat. But you already have a pretty good toolkit as it concerns Shabbat. And if you have just a basic, like Jeremiah Greenberg's Shabbat Siddur, it has a blessing after meals. And it goes on and on and on and on and on. And if you're new to Hebrew, you don't want to go through all that. Like, why are we doing all this? It never ends. Like, I'm sorry I ever ate supper, you know. But as you learn more, you begin to appreciate that long blessing. And depending on who's saying the blessing, you'll start joining in with them. The last one is, well, the first one, Shir HaMalot, which is the Psalm of Ascents. Shir HaMalot b'shuv Adonai Shivat Zion hayinu kechomid. All right, that's describing the person who goes out bearing his bag of seed, sowing in tears, but then he comes back carrying the bag of sheaves in joy. All right, what is it talking about? Not just return to the land, but again, it's talking about resurrection. It's a joyful song to start off the blessing after meals. But after that one, my favorite section is the last one, where it talks about how young lions may feel want and hunger, but the one who fears the Lord shall never lack. I once was young and now I have aged, but I've never seen a righteous man forsaken or his children begging bread. Beautiful words that go with Shabbat. And these are coming from ancient history. These things have been handed down. So when we're thinking of Zan, which is going to be, again, that root of Zion, it says, blessed are you, Adonai our God, King of the universe, who nourishes right there, Zan, the whole world, because we're talking about Hamazon, the nourishment, the provision, who nourishes the whole world in his goodness with grace, kindness, and mercy. That should sound familiar. He gives nourishment, there it is again, to all flesh, for his loving kindness is eternal. Through his great goodness, we have never lacked sustenance, and may we never lack nourishment in eternity. For his great name, because he is God who nourishes and sustains all, and prepares food for all of his creatures that he has created. As it is said, you open your hand and satisfy the desire of every living thing. Blessed are you, Adonai, who nourishes all. That's in just one of the blessings. How many times is Zan, nourishment, provision mentioned? It just stacks up. So when you start thinking of the book of Revelation and all the sevens in Revelation, don't focus exclusively on all the judgments that come in sevens. Because on the other side of that judgment are the things in this blessing. See, it's holy lamp, which you see as the book opens, versus the judgment as those seals open on the wicked lamp. So I might be reading about the judgments of the sevens, but again, where did I put my faith? Was I putting my faith in things like Psalm 113, Psalm 136, Psalm 145? He gives nourishment to all flesh. His loving kindness is eternal. We've never lacked sustenance. May we never lack nourishment in eternity. He nourishes and sustains all, prepares food for all of his creatures. You open your hand and satisfy the desire of every living thing. Blessed are you, Adonai, who nourishes all. So, am I thinking scripture? He prepares a table before me in the presence of my enemies, or am I just thinking about the enemies? When he's given us the balance, he's given us a way to choose. When we look at the 7, which side of the 7 do you want to be on? Do you want to be on the side of his merciful, repeated nourishment and loving kindness? Or do you prefer to be on the other side of that 7, suffering from the judgments of the sword and famine and wild beasts and plague? You can be on either side of that 7. But if you know anything at all about Shabbat and you're familiar with these blessings of Shabbat, then you can make a connection there and say, okay, yes, there is judgment in the earth, but it's just like Sheol. The righteous are over here with Father Abraham being nourished. The wicked are over here just wishing they had a drop of water. Forget the banquet. I just want a drop of water. In the presence of your enemies. Think of Revelation. In the presence of my enemies. He's going to prepare a table before me. Why? Because I know what to feed on. I'm feeding on the word. He says he nourishes and sustains all. He prepares food for all of his creatures. He made Yeshua to be the bread of heaven so that he could nourish and sustain us, all his creatures, and satisfy our desire. If our desire is for the word, it will be satisfied. But see, if our satisfaction comes, or we think it can come, from the things of the world, from worry, from anxiety, from being demanding, from always wanting more, then guess what? You'll always want. See the difference? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I shall not be empty and always hungry. But if I'm wicked, then I shall be not only found lacking in my measure, I shall always be demanding. My soul will always demand. My soul will always be proud. You know what? If you're a proud person, the best thing that can ever happen to you is he brings you low so that you can come into the kingdom. It's a blessing. It's a kindness. Now, that Zayin is connected linguistically, again, to Zan, Strong's 2671 and 2177. But if we look at the Zan in Psalm 144:13, it gives it a little nuance of meaning that's very special. Because if we're looking at Zayin, or 7, as Shabbat, then we must also look at it as Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. They have something in common. And so in Psalm 144 and 2 Chronicles 16:14, we get a clue, we get a hint that points us not just to Shabbat, but also to the Feast of Sukkot. Because it says, let our garners be full, furnishing every kind of produce, and our flocks bring forth thousands and 10,000s in our fields. All right, every kind of produce, zan. So it's not just nourishment, it's every kind of nourishment. And providing every kind of nourishment. And in that you can hear the diversity of the things that are brought in at Sukkot. It's not just barley, it's not just wheat. It's from the wine vat, it's from the threshing floor, it's from the flocks, it's from the herds, it's from the fruit of the ground, it's from the fruit of the tree. What are we saying? Every kind of produce. Zan. And that's what Psalm 144 is saying. Our garners are going to be full. We're going to have every kinds of those produce like we would have at Sukkot. It says, and our flocks bring forth thousands and 10,000s in our fields. Now, I don't even know if I've still got it up here. It's in Ezekiel. That's not it. Anyway.
Give me a phrase and I'll search for you.
It's Ezekiel something, where it talks about like how Jerusalem is going to be full. And it says, and it's going to be like flocks of men at the feasts. Like flocks of men. Flocks of men would be the key phrase. And I know it's in Ezekiel because I just wrote it this morning. And which I've got 3 different manuscripts out I've been working on today. So I have like scatterbrains for sure. But that's the hook there. Zon, Zain. Nourishment. 7. Shabbat, Sukkot. What do we enjoy on Shabbat? We've prepared diverse kinds of things. That's our best meal of the week. What do we do at Sukkot? We bring in every kind of produce, every kind of thing. And then Ezekiel says in the millennial reign that Jerusalem and the cities of Israel are going to be full, like flocks of men in Jerusalem at the feasts. So when we're reading in Revelation, it's helping us to prepare for a return to the land. It's giving us GPS, but we know that there is a high standard, there's a high bar if we want to go into the land. That's why Israel had to wander around for 40 years to figure out what Torah was. And somehow we think we got it nailed in 3 years, but even with Moses, it took them 40 years wandering around the wilderness, and even then they hadn't been doing everything, right? There were things that they had not been doing all in that wilderness. There it is. Linda Dietz found it. It's Ezekiel 36:37. Let me see what it reads like in the Peshitta. I don't even know how it's arranged. Oh, it may not have it in here. But it should. Nope. I want to read it. Thirty-six, 37. Here it is. Yeah, I don't like the translation so much, but it says, moreover, in this I will respond to the house of Israel and act for their sake. I will multiply their people like sheep. As Jerusalem is filled with sacrificial sheep during her festivals, so shall the ruined cities be filled with flocks of people, and they shall know that I am the Lord. All right, so it's a multiplication, it's a filling up, it's that nourishment of people. And he's making a comparison there. As it is at Sukkot in Jerusalem, or at the other feasts in Jerusalem, when you see these enormous numbers of sheep coming in to celebrate the feast, he's saying all the cities are going to be like that. Why? Because they're going to be full. It's like it says, let our garners be full, furnishing every kind of produce, and our flocks bring forth thousands and 10,000s in our fields. And I think way out here in the field, our numbers are increasing. Right? So the next step is we've got to figure out how to plant in the sheep where true home is. Why they're being generated out here in the field, to get their noses pointed in the right direction at least. So when these troubled times come, they won't be troubled. They'll know that that's the whole point, is to get them gathered to Israel. 2 Chronicles 16:14 describes the all sorts or all kinds. It talks about the resting place, which he had filled with spices of various kinds, blended by the perfumer's art. So in this case, it's like spice. It's like incense that's been mixed together. And if you know anything about mixing perfumes and things, sometimes there are things like myrrh. If you've ever smelled myrrh by itself, it stinketh. It's nasty. But if you mix it with frankincense, it smells very beautiful. So that's another wonderful picture. When it talks about various sorts or various kinds of things, it talks about the flocks and the produce. And then in 2 Chronicles, it talks about incense. And so that provoked me, which I've never followed up on it, but it provoked me to think, with the incense that we know represents the prayers of the saints, I wonder too if that special recipe, that special mixture, represents a special assembly of the nations. How with this divine machine, somehow he knew that we would get planted out here in these fields far away, but somehow the prayers of the saints assembling and collecting there at Jerusalem. It says blended by the perfumer's art. And so that prayer that we pray or we sing, depending on whether you know the tune or not on Shabbat, mazon, in it you can hear that root of Zion. We can apply that little grammar rule of adding a mem to the front of the word. And then we have the means by which the nourishment is accomplished. Right? So we have Sukkot, the seventh feast, one in which the Israelites are going to bring all manner of offerings and produce, just like Psalm 144 says. And they're going to be consumed in Jerusalem at Sukkot. Every kind of grain, fruit, vegetable, sheep, goats, cattle, you name it. It's going to be collected there. And so what are they doing? They're coming into the holy city to consume their offerings. Right? You can't do that if you've not planned. If you don't know when the feasts are, if you don't know you're a sheep, hearing Yeshua's voice, because he's not going to misdirect you. He's going to call you to a specific place at a specific time with a specific group of people. And the offerings, the tithes and the offerings that you have prepared, you're either going to sell them and take the money in your hand to purchase there, or you will take them with you to enjoy in Jerusalem with the other sheep. So you bring a sacrifice and you are a sacrifice at the very same time. What would that tell us? To some extent, and we don't want to make this absolute and say everybody who doesn't observe the biblical feast is going to die in the tribulation. We're not saying that. The whole point of tribulation is to move people into the feasts where their protection is. What we have to be prepared to do is when that time comes, to proclaim that, because there's people who might be shutting us out now, who, when they start to see the shaking going on in the world, they say, let me go back and read my Bible again. Can anybody tell me what this means? Because probably if you didn't know and you just picked up the Bible and said, let me figure out Passover and Shavuot and Sukkot, you would know where to start. You wouldn't know how to read a calendar, and good grief, Lord knows we've got calendars. But at any rate, to even tell them where to start, instead of judging them and saying, why didn't you listen to me when I tried to tell you this 10 years ago? Remember, Yeshua says the one hired at the last hour gets paid. That's why it's no good to have a high look. When people reject us, when we start trying to preach to them the feasts and the Torah and kosher eating, and they reject us, be careful how you judge them. Because if they come to you at the last hour and say, okay, could you go through this Passover thing with me one more time? And you're like, what do you mean one more time? You never let me finish the first time. That's fine. You say, this is the way it goes. And you don't begrudge them the mercy that they receive and the paycheck. You don't begrudge that. Now, as it concerns your labor, Yeshua will deal with you too. And the great thing might be that maybe you didn't think you deserved a great place at the table. And he does come by and say, hey, move up here. I got some people I want you to meet up here. But see, all of that, he's saying, don't figure that out for yourself. Don't be trying to arrange the table and put place cards on the table. Don't get overly frustrated with people when they don't get it the first time, because he's going to send a tribulation to help them, to start shaking things that they had faith in. If they had faith in some denomination, if they had faith in a Judaism, if they had faith in Buddhism, if they had faith in agnosticism, if they had faith in politics, if they had faith in the military, no matter where their faith was misplaced, the tribulation will shake that out. And if they say, hey, okay, somebody tell me what we're doing here, we have to be prepared to step in and say, this is what we're doing. Right? I'm not perfect. I don't have it all nailed down, but I do know the difference between inside Jerusalem and outside it. Because inside Jerusalem is where we celebrate the feasts and we get back on his calendar where he can meet us. Outside there, there's no guarantee. Because eventually what is outside of there are going to be unclean things, abominable things, unrepentant things, things that that's the congregation you don't want to be with. Trust me, you want to be in here with this one. You want to be a sheep. All right? And their hearing will either become better or worse when the shepherd calls. And if their hearing becomes better, then we want to be there and say, hey, this 7 thing, this tribulation thing, it's for our good. Because now we won't have to continue as eternal mixtures. See, various kinds of produce means clean produce. It means holy produce. It doesn't mean you're out there mixing clean and unclean, holy and unholy. It means within holy and within clean, there's still a diversity of clean things. There's the fruit of the tree. There's the fruit of the ground. There's the sheep. There's the goats. There are many colors, thanks to Jacob, right? We're speckled, streaked, spotted colors, right? And so within that, there's a beautiful diversity of the sheep. But what we want to do is help them make a distinction between who is inside and who's outside. And one of the beautiful things was on page 37, it was the quote from Nehemiah, where it talks about how they had to carry their weapons while they built the walls. They came back from Babylon. They had been in deep, dark trouble for 70 years over the idolatry thing. They come back. The temple and the city are in disrepair. And the ruins. And these people are few compared to the numbers that stayed in Babylon. These numbers were few that came back and tried to rebuild. Just remember that when it feels like we're few and far in between. Because Nehemiah says to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, the work is great and extensive, and we are separated on the wall far from one another. At whatever place you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us. And we can say the same thing. We're up here working on the wall, and there are Arabs and Ammonites hurling insults at us, and we're trying to work and do the right thing and not get offended when they do hurl the insults. And maybe we get caught up sometimes comparing our wall repairs to our neighbor's wall repairs. And so he's still working on our good eyes. But Nehemiah gives us the secret. It's not just carry your sword. Remember the Zion? When you're rebuilding Jerusalem, it may be that it is in such disrepair that you do have to have a sword in one hand and build with the other. And it may be that we're so far apart on the wall that we won't know if the other one's in trouble until the trumpet blows. But what does Nehemiah say? If you hear the trumpet, he doesn't say run away. He says run to where the trouble is. Go help your brother on that wall. And that's where we are today. We're scattered out there. And when our brothers and sisters get in trouble, we've got to be sensitive to that and figure out a way to come and support them, even when they're a long way away. And this particular wall that they rebuilt, when they came back, they didn't hold a candle to the first temple. I don't know if you remember reading that, how the elders just wept because it was so lacking. They remembered the splendor of the first temple, and they're like, I can't believe we're calling this a temple. I can't believe we're calling this Jerusalem. And maybe that's some of our problem. Maybe that's some of our bad eye. We're expecting the splendor of Jerusalem of gold, but this is what we got. And so what? We have to believe we have everything. We got everything we need. For your little place on the wall where you're building and my little place on the wall where I'm building, we're going to have to be vigilant. Ignore the insulters. Don't let them get under your skin. Keep your weapon close and help your brother. And even then, when you get done, it does not approach the beauty and the splendor that they remembered of that first temple. In fact, it was wicked kings that built the splendor, the physical splendor, back into the temple. It was the Herods who actually transformed it and made it look like it was the temple of old. But what did they focus on? The physical. What they had right there on that wall, no matter how raggedy it looked compared to the first temple, the presence came down and met them anyway. They gave what they had. They gave where they were. They gave to each other with a sword in one hand and a hammer in the other. And that's what we have to do today. We have to be ready for the insults. And the best thing you can do most of the time is, unless somebody lays hands on you suddenly, ignore them. How much work do you think they would get done if they listened to the Arabs and the Ammonites? See, don't get on Facebook and get in these big arguing matches with Arabs and Ammonites. All right? They're everywhere. And their sole point is to do exactly what we said at the beginning, is to distract you and to steal your time with things that go nowhere, and it slows down your work on your little part of the wall. When you should be building yourself up in the Word, instead you're throwing rocks back at an Arab or an Ammonite on Facebook. Don't get seduced into that. It's a trick. You already know about it. You read about it in the book of Nehemiah. And no matter how many insults they hurl at you, whatever you are building is beautiful. I don't care how raggedy it is compared to the perfection we read about in Scripture. It's your little piece of the wall, and you're applying the word that you know. Yeshua was a builder. We'll follow in his example. You're learning from a master builder. And as you build, you'll improve. You'll get better. And we'll all get better. And more people will join us on the wall. Because it's the spiritual, it's the humble spirit, it's the undemanding soul and the good eye that are going to repair that wall. It's not going to be the people spending all day arguing with Arabs. It's just stealing your time. Physical or spiritual.